I witnessed the truth behind New Jersey's mysterious UFO sightings. And even now, recalling that night sends a cold spike of fear through my chest. People love to dismiss these stories, calling them hoaxes, misidentified planes, or wild fantasies. But how do I explain what I actually saw, hovering low over quiet suburban streets, glowing with a silent, otherworldly aura that still haunts my dreams? Even as I speak these words, I wonder if I made the right choice stepping into that darkness. What would you have done, faced with something that defies everything you've been taught to believe? It wasn't long ago that I came across a news report shrugging off bizarre lights in the New Jersey night sky. Official statements claimed these were nothing but harmless flares or reflections of commercial aircraft overhead. The tone was so certain, so condescending, that it pricked at my curiosity. The witnesses, however, sounded too earnest, too shaken. They spoke of patterns and strange occurrences that reminded me of the infamous New Jersey Turnpike UFO incident back in 2001, when stunned motorists watched silent, hovering lights that no authority could explain. If these new sightings shared that same eerie signature, why were the officials so eager to bury the story? Determined to find my own answers, I headed out to a suburban area about 30 miles from the city, a place whispered about on online forums and community boards. It was a typical American neighborhood, the kind you'd never associate with cosmic mysteries. Yet that night, something felt off the moment I parked. The sky was clear, the moon a delicate crescent, and the air still, too still. No crickets, no distant hum of traffic, just silence, so dense it weighed on me. I set up my camera at the edge of a clearing lined with tall pines. I kept my flashlight off, not wanting to announce my presence. Locals had reported glowing orbs, scorched lawns, missing pets, and chemical odors no one could identify. A farmer insisted 2 of his sheep vanished overnight without a sound. Absurd, yes, but I felt a fierce need to know. Standing there with my heart pounding, I wondered if I would witness something that would change everything. For nearly an hour, I saw nothing. Then, when doubt began to creep in, a faint glow emerged beyond the treetops. It flickered, then pulsed, like a distant heartbeat made of light. My breath caught as the object drifted into view, hovering silently. I hit record, my palms damp with sweat. This thing had no wings, no rotors, no jet engines, yet it moved as if gravity was optional. Was I seeing some top-secret craft, or had I stumbled upon something not of this earth? The lights grew brighter and shifted through hues I could barely describe. Squinting, I tried to steady my breathing. Then I heard a soft rustle behind me, spinning around to find nothing but darkness. Yet the sensation of being watched intensified. Turning back, I saw the craft dip lower, its glow highlighting the pines, contorting their shadows into unsettling shapes. Something at the edge of the clearing seemed to shift, and I suddenly understood that I was not alone. Static crackled in my camera's microphone, the screen jittering as if under some invisible strain. Fear gnawed at me, telling me to flee, yet I remained rooted, driven by a strange compulsion to know the truth. Was I inviting danger? Would these entities, if they were entities, tolerate an intruder? My mind swirled with half-formed questions, my stomach tight. Then came the humming, a low resonance that vibrated through my ribcage. It didn't sound mechanical or alive. It was something else, a presence made audible. My throat tightened, and I felt as if I was trespassing in a realm not meant for human eyes. If this was a secret government project, then it was far beyond the ordinary. If it was something else entirely, what did that mean for us? I watched in uneasy awe as the craft's lights dimmed slightly, and the humming receded to a gentle throb. The silence that followed felt loaded, as though communicating that I had only glimpsed a fraction of whatever lay beyond our understanding. My camera still recorded, but would anyone believe what I showed them? Would I even have the courage to share it? A twig snapped in the darkness, and my heart seized. The shadows beyond the tree line seemed to close in, silent observers of this impossible encounter. I realized I stood at the threshold of something that would leave its mark on me forever. I didn't know if I was safe, if I had already crossed a line. Blinking hard, I forced myself to breathe. Whatever happened next, I would carry this night inside me. A reminder that the boundaries we trust are fragile. We are not alone, I thought, and that realization chilled me more than I care to admit. When I returned to that clearing the next night, I was certain I had a plan. I brought extra batteries, new recording equipment, and a friend who agreed to hide at a distance. I needed a second pair of eyes, someone to confirm that what I saw wasn't just a trick of my mind. We arrived early, just after dusk, slipping through a gap in a chain-link fence that bordered the property. As we stepped into the shadows, the place felt different. The air smelled faintly metallic, and a film of uneasy silence pressed against my ears, making every breath deliberate and strained. My friend, Tony, had grown skeptical since I first told him about these sightings. He was a practical man, used to explaining away strange events with weather balloons, drones, or pranks. But something about my voice convinced him to come, albeit reluctantly. He muttered under his breath about how foolish this all was, and I couldn't blame him. Yet he stayed, scanning the trees with nervous intensity, waiting for something that would make sense or send us running. We set up a small infrared camera aimed at the same gap in the pines. I began recounting the previous night's events to Tony, quietly walking him through the sequence. As I described the hovering craft, the shifting lights, and the unnerving hum, he looked unconvinced. But then, as if to mock our doubts, a faint glow emerged from behind the treetops. It started faint, a gentle pulse that you could dismiss as a distant porch light. Then it intensified, spreading into 3 distinct orbs that hovered in a perfect triangle. Tony inhaled sharply, cursing under his breath. I steadied the camera, heart pounding. This was it. Proof. The orbs moved soundlessly, drifting lower, their edges sharp and defined. Unlike planes or helicopters, there were no blinking indicators, no engine sounds, just silent perfection. I felt a surge of triumph. If we could just record a full minute of this, show the world something undeniable, everything might change. But the moment I tried to zoom in, a strange interference crackled through the camera's speakers, and the lens went blurry. Tony cursed again, fiddling with his own phone. The signal was gone. Our batteries, fresh from their packages, drained in an instant. My throat tightened as a static hush replaced all familiar sounds. Had they detected us? My mind raced, imagining entities more advanced than we could comprehend. Then something unexpected happened. The 3 glowing orbs shifted formation, merging into a single brilliant sphere that expanded with a sudden burst of light. For a split second, I thought this was it, the grand reveal. Instead, the light dimmed, revealing something new, a shape descending quietly into the clearing. It had a surface that absorbed the moonlight, leaving only a vague outline. The hairs on my neck rose as I realized we were looking at an object that should not exist. Tony pulled on my sleeve, panicked. He whispered fiercely, asking if we should run. But I stayed, mesmerized, desperate to understand what I was seeing. As we crept closer, I noticed footprints in the damp soil. Not the neat impressions of boots, but elongated tracks, too narrow and too deep, arranged in a pattern that made no sense. My stomach churned. Had someone or something walked here recently? And if so, where were they now? Tony shone a tiny pen light toward the ground, revealing scorched patches of grass forming perfect circles. It smelled faintly like singed hair. At that moment, a faint mechanical hum rose, just like before. The object hovered inches above the clearing, and in the periphery of my vision, I thought I saw figures darting among the trees, thin silhouettes that flickered in and out of sight. Tony grabbed my arm, his voice trembling. He insisted this was enough, that we had seen more than we should. Yet I couldn't pull away. I wanted to confront it, to demand an explanation. Was I really prepared to face that truth? Then, without warning, a brilliant flash erupted, forcing us to shield our eyes. When it faded, the clearing was empty. No craft, no orbs, no figures. Just the echo of our ragged breathing. We stumbled forward, searching for any sign that could prove this wasn't some shared hallucination. The infrared camera lay useless on the ground, its circuits fried. Tony's phone wouldn't turn on. Even my watch had stopped ticking. Confused and furious, I scraped at the soil, searching for clues, but all I found were those strange footprints leading nowhere. The circles of scorched grass were still there, tangible evidence that something had touched this place. Yet we had nothing concrete to show anyone. If I tried to explain this, who would believe me? A sensation of dread settled into my bones. It felt as if the deeper I dug into this mystery, the more elusive it became. Each time I thought I had a handle on it, it twisted into something stranger. Tony gripped my shoulder, his voice low and urgent, telling me we should leave before something else happened. But I hesitated, looking toward the dark. Horizon. What was I missing? The orbs, the craft, the tracks in the dirt. These weren't random occurrences. They felt like messages, warnings, or tests. My heart sank as I realized we weren't just dealing with unidentified lights in the sky. This was a puzzle intentionally left unsolved, a barrier guarding a secret darker and larger than I ever imagined. We left the clearing in silence, each step heavy, each glance over the shoulder laced with fear. Whatever was out there knew how to stay hidden, how to thwart our attempts at understanding. And as we slipped back through that fence, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had only just begun to glimpse the true enormity of what lurked behind those lights, waiting for its next move. Back home, I tried to convince myself that what we'd witnessed could be explained by some advanced drone test or an elaborate prank, yet I couldn't ignore the memories echoing inside my head. The static-filled silence, the flawless geometric lights, the scorched circles in the grass. None of it fit the simple explanations Tony offered over the phone the next morning. He wanted to believe it was all some cutting-edge military exercise. I wanted to believe that too, but something felt off. How could we both have experienced the same impossible things and have nothing to show for it? Every device we brought was dead or malfunctioning. Our only proof was each other's terrified whispers. That morning, I drove through neighborhoods eerily similar to the place we'd visited. Well-tended lawns, chain-link fences, and quiet tree-lined streets. But now, each harmless facade felt staged, as if something lurked behind the painted doors and picture windows. I'd read about past UFO sightings in New Jersey, the Turnpike Lights in 2001, occasional strange reports from the Pine Barrens. Most were dismissed by skeptics and officials alike. This time, though, I knew what I saw. Yet where could I turn for answers? I tried talking to some locals, choosing my words carefully. At a coffee shop near the outskirts of the area, I asked a middle-aged man if he'd ever heard of strange lights around here. He paused, then shrugged. "Kids playing tricks," he said. His forced smile and the darting look in his eyes told me he knew more than he dared share. Another woman, loading groceries into her trunk, tensed when I mentioned odd occurrences at night. She offered no explanation, just a clipped warning to mind my own business. That's when I noticed a dark SUV idling at the far end of the parking lot, its windows tinted, so I couldn't see who might be watching. Tony called and said he wanted nothing more to do with this. He'd lost sleep, he felt jumpy, and his wife was annoyed that he'd wasted a night chasing nonsense. I didn't blame him for wanting out, but I couldn't let go. Something had burned itself into my mind. The way that thing hovered, how the world around it felt hushed and wrong. I had to push forward. I felt like if I stopped now, I'd never rest easy again. Before noon, I took a drive out to an older stretch of land rumored to have hosted secret experiments during the Cold War. Rumors, nothing concrete, but I followed my gut. The old dirt road led to a patch of farmland, with half-collapsed barns and fences leaning at odd angles. I parked, climbed out, and immediately noticed the absence of birdsong. No insects chirped, just that. Empty hush again. On the ground I found faint impressions, like someone had carved elongated footprints into the soil. They matched what Tony and I saw at the clearing. I knelt down, running my finger along the groove. It was damp, the earth strangely warm to the touch, as if recently disturbed. A noise startled me, a distant thrum, too low to be a plane. I looked up, expecting to see a helicopter, but the sky was empty. I began to wonder if something was scrambling my senses. I shook my head, trying to stay rational. Could these footprints be from some advanced reconnaissance drone landing gear? Something designed by human hands yet beyond civilian knowledge? The thought both soothed and frightened me. Government involvement might at least ground this mystery in something earthly. But if that was the truth, what were they hiding, and why? Later that afternoon, I managed to track down a local historian named Carlson, who specialized in oddities and folklore. Meeting him at his cramped study, I expected a harmless eccentric, but he greeted me with tension in his eyes. When I described the lights and the strange circles, he paled. He took a long moment before speaking softly. "You're not the first to see them," he said. "Decades ago, people talked about lights over old farmland. Some claimed experiments, others swore it was otherworldly. Then men in suits came, asked questions, told folks to keep quiet. Eventually, everyone learned not to talk." I asked Carlson if he believed these were aliens. His jaw clenched. "I don't know," he said. "But whatever it is, it doesn't want to be understood." He cautioned me to stop digging, said that prying eyes often found trouble. I left with a hollow feeling in my chest. Another dead end, another warning sign. Could it all be deliberate misinformation? A maze of half-truths meant to throw me off? As I stepped outside, I noticed Tony's car parked nearby. I'd asked him to meet me, hoping to calm his nerves. But when I reached his vehicle, he was gone. The driver's door stood open, engine off, keys still in the ignition. On the seat lay his phone, screen cracked, buzzing faintly with static. My stomach knotted. I called his name, searching the empty lot, the alley, even peering through a gap in a chain-link fence bordering a weedy field. Nothing. He wouldn't just leave like that. A sound drew my attention upward. There, against a dimming sky, 3 faint orbs glowed, barely visible. I shielded my eyes, heart pounding. A sudden gust of wind kicked up dust and debris, stinging my face. "Tony!" I shouted, voice echoing without answer. This felt like a threat, a warning that they controlled who came and went. Just then, a soft hum filled my ears, not loud, but overwhelming. My lungs felt tight. The orbs dimmed and vanished behind a veil of black cloud. The next instant, I thought I saw movement in the weeds behind the fence. A shape, too tall and thin to be human, swaying soundlessly. Paralyzed by fear, I forced myself toward the fence. Each step felt heavier, as if gravity had doubled. Night pressed in, and I realized how alone I was. Before I could call for help, the humming grew, resonating through my bones. Whatever was out there, it had Tony, or at least it wanted me to think so. And now I was trapped in its silence, trembling, unable to decide if I should run for my life or step closer and face whatever lurked in that impenetrable darkness. The next night, I found myself back at the outskirts of that silent clearing, my heart pounding like a trapped animal in my chest. I knew I had no choice. Tony was missing, and if I turned my back now, I'd never find out what happened to him or what lurked in the darkness. The sky offered no comfort. The moon had vanished behind a haze of low clouds, and the air smelled faintly of ozone, thick and electric. Static seemed to crackle in my lungs with every breath, as if I stood at the edge of some invisible barrier. I inched forward through shrubs and twisted roots, recalling how Tony's empty car stood abandoned that afternoon, and how I'd seen those orbs flicker silently overhead. If they'd taken him, if that was even the right word, then I had to at least try to understand why. I carried a flashlight and an old audio recorder I'd dug out of storage. No fancy cameras or high-tech gear this time. Those things failed me before. Now I trusted only my eyes and ears, and even they felt unreliable. As I reached the clearing's center, my flashlight beam cut through an eerie fog that wasn't there before. The ground looked disturbed, as if something massive had pressed against it and then lifted away. The smell grew stronger, a chemical tang riding on the breeze, making my eyes water. I thought I heard a distant mechanical hum, the same unnatural vibration that had filled my head during previous encounters. This time it seemed layered, like multiple notes blending into a discordant harmony. Then the lights appeared, not one or two, but half a dozen. They hovered in a loose formation, shifting silently above the treetops. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. Were they responding to me? Did my presence draw them out, or was I simply caught up in an event that would have happened regardless? I raised the recorder to capture the hum, but all I got was a coarse static. Frustrated, I whispered Tony's name under my breath, half hoping he'd answer, half expecting nothing. Suddenly, one of the lights dove sharply, passing just behind a cluster of pines. I saw its glow refracted in the needles, painting a ghostly silhouette of something that shouldn't exist. I moved closer, and the hum grew louder. The trees swayed without wind, and I realized I'd stepped onto a patch of scorched earth. It formed a wide ring, and at its center stood a shape I first took for a warped tree trunk. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was no tree. It was a tall, slender figure, hunched slightly, arms too long, head tilted at an impossible angle. It shimmered faintly, as if caught between being solid and transparent. My throat locked up. I wanted to run, but my body refused. The figure turned slowly toward me. Though I saw no clear features, I felt its attention like a physical weight. My mind swam with questions. Was this an occupant of the craft? A guard? A scout? Or something else entirely? As if answering my unspoken thoughts, the hum warped into something almost like a voice, but twisted and layered, too alien to parse. I stumbled backward, raising my flashlight, and caught a glimpse of eyes, or something like eyes, reflecting the light, narrowing as if studying me. In that moment, I understood something terrible. This was not a random visitation. The patterns, the scorched rings, the missing livestock, the vanished friend, these weren't accidents. They were deliberate acts, part of a methodical process I couldn't begin to fathom. The figure took a step toward me, its movement unnatural, as if every joint bent in multiple directions. I shouted Tony's name, my voice ragged, but the figure offered no response, no gesture of kindness or cruelty. It simply regarded me. Above, the lights multiplied, forming intricate geometries. I realized they were not just crafts but signals, a language of motion and color. For the first time, I considered that what I saw was merely a sliver of a larger design. Could these beings be mapping us, sampling us, or testing boundaries? Were human subjects in some enormous, unseen laboratory? My knees trembled. I tried to speak, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" I asked, though I knew it was futile. The figure made no sound, but the hum intensified, and for an instant, my vision blurred. I saw flashes of impossible landscapes, barren fields under strange skies, structures that defied geometry, lights that pulsed like living organs. In that dizzying second, I felt what could only be described as an intrusion, as if something probed my mind, rifling through memories, searching for meaning. When my vision cleared, the figure was closer, looming over me. I could sense intellect in its stillness, a cold curiosity. I fumbled for the audio recorder, pressing the play button out of desperation. Static sputtered, then a brief snippet of Tony's voice emerged, distorted and faint, begging to be released from somewhere unimaginable. My heart lurched. Tony was alive, or had been when this was recorded. A sudden surge of wind kicked up dirt and leaves, forcing me to shield my eyes. When I looked again, the figure had vanished. In its place, something metallic glinted in the dirt. I scooped it up, a small fragment of unknown alloy, warm to the touch and engraved with patterns that seemed to shift when I moved it. The hovering lights began to recede, drifting higher, winking out one by one. The hum lessened, leaving only a hollow buzz in my ears. My hands shook as I clutched that fragment. Had they left me a clue, a warning, or a cruel joke? Had I gained understanding, or merely peered into an endless abyss? I staggered backward, realizing this was no resolution. If anything, I was now tied to their secret. I knew Tony was out there, somewhere beyond my reach. I knew our world was far stranger and more vulnerable than I'd ever imagined, and I knew that whatever I'd witnessed was only a piece of a larger puzzle. The final truth remained hidden, leaving me with a single horrifying certainty. We were not in control, and we never had been. I must have passed out not long after they vanished. When I came to, dawn light was filtering through the trees, and I lay crumpled near the scorched patch of earth, still clutching that curious metallic fragment. My head ached, and my throat felt raw. I pushed myself up slowly, half expecting to see them hovering silently overhead. The silence was ordinary again, distant birds chirping, a faint hum of traffic somewhere far off. For a moment, I could have almost convinced myself it was a nightmare, but the fragment in my hand assured me it was not. I stumbled through the woods back to my car, terrified at the thought that I might find it gone or destroyed. Instead, it was exactly where I'd left it. The world had moved on, indifferent to what I'd been through. With shaking hands, I placed the fragment on the passenger seat and started the engine. The drive home felt surreal. The sun rose higher, illuminating suburban lawns and quiet streets. Everything so normal it seemed like a cruel joke. Had I truly glimpsed beings beyond our understanding? Or had I slipped into some psychological trap? The fragment offered no obvious secrets at first. It was about the size of a key, warm to the touch, marked with swirling patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. At home, I locked all the doors and examined it under a lamp. When I angled it just right, the patterns aligned, forming a kind of grid. I realized these shapes matched the scorched circles and footprints I'd seen at various sites. Each pattern repeated in precise sequences, hinting at deliberate design. I remembered the flashes of impossible landscapes, structures that defied logic, and wondered if this fragment was part of a larger code, a map, or a message. Over the next few days, I tried to understand what I'd uncovered. I read up on other sightings worldwide. Lights in remote deserts, objects that hovered over cities yet left no photographic evidence, people disappearing without explanation. I found old newspaper clippings and obscure eyewitness accounts describing eerily similar patterns. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. This wasn't about one event in New Jersey. It was a pattern occurring everywhere, weaving through decades of quiet, denied incidents. Governments, I suspected, knew more than they admitted. Their dismissive explanations felt hollow now. Perhaps they were as helpless as the rest of us, struggling to contain something vastly more advanced and deeply entrenched than any secret project. The more I learned, the more I felt the weight of what I'd seen. Tony's disappearance echoed in my mind. I replayed his last words, his fear, and his disbelief. I remembered how the lights had hovered above me, how the figure's gaze seemed to pierce my mind. If they were studying us, what was their purpose? Were they farmers and we were the crop? Were they explorers cataloging species on a distant frontier? Or were we simply curiosities, flickering life forms too primitive to warrant direct contact? I stood in my small living room, curtains drawn, staring at the fragment in my hand. All the pieces fit together now. The hushed witnesses, the scorched earth, the vanishing livestock. the drones and lights that moved in perfect silence. The fragment served as tangible proof that our visitors were no myth, no atmospheric anomaly. They were real and careful. They picked their moments, leaving just enough evidence to rattle us, but never enough to expose themselves fully. They had rules, patterns, and a purpose we couldn't decipher. I tried showing the fragment to an old friend who worked in material science, careful not to reveal its origin. He frowned at its odd density and the way it refracted light. He said it was unlike any alloy he knew, suggested it might be a hoax. I pressed him, and he grew uncomfortable, mumbling that he'd rather not know where I got it. Fear, or maybe deep-seated instinct, told him to leave it alone. He handed it back, his hand trembling slightly. That told me all I needed. The fragment was real. Whatever it meant, it was beyond our capability to understand or replicate. I felt changed. The world outside my door was no longer a familiar place. Every distant hum, every star in the sky, every unexplained nighttime sound carried new meaning. The revelation was as beautiful as it was terrifying. If these beings could walk among us unseen, rewriting what we thought we knew about life and technology, what did that say about our grasp of reality? If they could snatch people without a trace, what chance did we have of ever truly understanding our place in the universe? In the early morning, unable to sleep, I stood in my driveway and looked up at the sky. It was clear and crisp, scattered with stars. Among them, who knew what watched from afar? I closed my eyes and tried to imagine Tony's voice calling out, begging for release. I tried to imagine these beings as explorers, rather than captors. But the memory of that figure's silent stare refused to soften. They had chosen not to communicate in any way we could grasp. Instead, they left me with a cryptic artifact, as if to say, "We are here. We have always been here. You will never fully understand." I could ask 1,000 questions, but I would never receive the answers I craved. Still, I clung to a single truth. This was bigger than me, bigger than all of us. If what I witnessed could happen here, in quiet neighborhoods and empty fields, then what else lay concealed beneath the world's calm veneer? Perhaps we were never the masters of our own destiny. Perhaps we were just one more species under observation, our comforts and certainties hanging by a thread. I turned away from the stars, unsettled. For now, I carry that fragment with me, a reminder that reality is not what we think it is. I've learned a truth far beyond the official stories and neat explanations. And if I dare to ask what else might be lurking out there, I realize I may not want to know the answer. I must accept that some secrets are too vast, too alien, to comprehend. The question remains, if they're watching us, shaping our fears and doubts, how much longer until we become part of their design? Hello, agents. Curious about the most famous and shocking UFO cases? My new ebook uncovers 51 encounters the government tried to hide. Find it in the pinned comment. And if you enjoyed these stories, make sure to subscribe. And there's another one waiting for you right here.